I'm going to make a quick video and show you how I do the leak down test. I'm going to be doing a leak down test on the center cylinder of this triple H1 Kawasaki 1973. The reason I want to make this video is because you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on a kit to do a two-stroke leak down test. $3 for this plug, it will plug my intake. Another $3 for this one, it'll plug my exhaust. This particular Schrader valve was a little tougher to find because I needed one with 1/8 inch threads, and I did find this on Amazon.com for $1 or $2, and I have Prime, so the shipping was free. There's a good chance you could find this at a plumbing supply place if you have a local plumbing supply place, and those expansion plugs came right from AutoZone. All very easy to find locally. This I can't guarantee the plumbing house will have it, but ask for a head tank pressure valve, the Schrader valve. They should know what you mean. And what I'm using here is a compression tester, fairly basic tool. You probably already have one. I already unthreaded the gauge and set it aside because my Schrader valve is going to go into this end and supply the air. And with this valve stem core removed from the spark plug hole end, that is how I'm going to supply air to the cylinder for the leak down test. Absolutely have to remove that valve stem core, or of course the air will not travel into the cylinder. Another thing I already had is an air over oil type of air pump for suspension for an air over oil system. I have it for a Road King. I've got an older Road King with air over oil suspension. If you know anybody with a dirt bike, they might have one you can borrow. This was about a $40 pump, but it's a nice accurate gauge, and I'm going to supply 10 pounds as maximum pressure, 10 pounds to the system. Just to quickly summarize, I plug it with these two plugs from AutoZone. And from Amazon, I got this Schrader valve, and I removed the valve core from a compression tester I already have. And with this air pump, I'm going to supply the cylinder right through the spark plug hole with 10 pounds of air. And my piston will be at bottom dead center, roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just put the piston down towards bottom dead center so all your ports are open. And the procedure, once you are into pressurizing the cylinder, is you take soapy water. That is one of two ways to check for leaks. If you're lucky, it's going to be an obvious leak up around your intake manifold, base gasket, or head gasket. If you have a crank seal, it gets a little different. I have a triple and I'm doing the center cylinder. If I have a leaking seal between the second and third cylinder, I may hear that air leaking through the third cylinder intake. Same thing between the second and first cylinder. I'm pressurizing the second cylinder. If I have a leak on the left side of that second cylinder, I may hear that air escaping through the first cylinder intake. On the outer, I'm doing the center cylinder. Even though I'm doing the center cylinder, if I were doing the outer cylinder and I had a leak on the outer main seal, the first indicator of that would be, there's a good chance I would hear that leak through this fill hole on the primary side. And same thing on the left side of the bike. If I were pressurizing and checking this outer cylinder and this main crank seal was leaking, on this side you really wouldn't hear it. It's sealed up pretty tight. So if my gauge on my air pump showed air loss and I didn't see any bubbles anywhere else or hear any leaks on the opposite side of the cylinder into the next, leaking into the next, then I would uncover all this, remove all the timing parts, make sure you know how to reassemble that correctly and time your ignition correctly if applicable, which it is on this H1. You do have to retime it if you disassemble it. But you would be disassembling this whole ignition side and exposing that crank seal. And then again, you go at it with soapy water, make sure you still have pressure, and go to 10 pounds of pressure, and then you'd be looking right at the seal. And you're either going to see the leak there or not. Crankcase mating surfaces is a big area that you have to check all around. If you have a twin or a single cylinder, you most likely have a vertically split crankcase. On a twin cylinder is also going to have horizontal. So if you have a single, you're going to have a vertical split. If you have a double or triple, you'll have a horizontal split like this. Those are all areas to check with soapy water for leaks. And including in that crankcase mating surface, that could potentially leak into your primary side. Same thing as having the crankshaft seal leak into your primary side. There's a good chance you'll hear that leak through this hole. There is a section of the crankcase halves where it does seal up your gearbox, your transmission. On a two-stroke, these are completely separate parts. Your gears and your clutch and all your shifting mechanisms are in one part of your crankcase. Your crankshaft for the two-stroke is a totally separate part. So you could have that air leak on the crankcase mating surface to outside the bike, like I showed you up front, or the crankcase mating surface could potentially leak into your gearbox area, and that could be hard to hear. If it's leaking in there, it could be a minor leak, and it might be tough to hear. But it's potentially you could hear it through here. If you have this primary side crankcase seal leaking significantly, then you almost always will hear it leaking through the fill hole. The bottom end of a quick comment, not really an opinion of my own, just from experience, I can tell you a compression test on a two-stroke really doesn't tell you very much, because the bottom end of a two-stroke, and by that I mean the piston skirts, the ports, and the crankcase itself, really does a lot more on a two-stroke than what's happening above the piston rings and above the exhaust port. All you're doing up there is compression, ignition, power, and exhaust, and it happens all in 1/3 of the piston travel. The other 2/3 of the piston travel, as it goes down and back up, a lot more is happening in the bottom end. The ports close and you have to compress into a fresh air and fuel charge compresses in the bottom. Then it transfers to the top of the piston through the transfer ports, which are on the sides. You can kind of see right here is a transfer port for that outer cylinder. And then the piston goes through bottom dead center. Now it has to produce a vacuum. So in one cycle, actually in 1/2 of a cycle of this motor, that bottom end has to do two things. It has to successfully form a compression, which allows it to transfer to the top, and then it has to perform a vacuum as the piston starts going up, which draws in the next fresh air and fuel charge. So the bottom end of a two-stroke is a very demanding job. It has a very demanding job. That's why this leak down test really tells you a lot more about a two-stroke than a compression test does. Obviously, this video should save you a lot of money. Keep in mind, depending on what machine you have, you can pressurize through any of these 3 points you need: the spark plug hole, the intake, or the exhaust. If you come up with a way to pressurize through the intake or the exhaust, then obviously you just leave your spark plug in place and you check, as I described before, with soapy water and listening for crank seals through your intake. If I'm doing the center cylinder, if you have a twin and you're leaking from one cylinder to the next, you can usually hear that leak through the next cylinder. For example, if I pressurize this middle like I will be, and I have a leak between these two cylinders, I may hear that air leak coming into this third cylinder. Same thing on the other side. If you have a double, that center seal, you would be able to hear it cross over. Hope this helps, and with some ingenuity and invest a little time in looking for the fittings you need, you definitely will save some money. Thanks for watching. Hope this helps.